If you asked most people which battles shattered Europe's myth of invincibility, they'd probably never mention Africa. Because hidden across this continent are defeats that changed history, yet rarely received the attention they deserve. A king who never came home, an army that was never supposed to lose, an empire forced to abandon its dream of conquest. This is that history. In 1824, the British Empire believed it was about to crush another regional rival. The Ashanti Kingdom had become one of the most powerful states in West Africa, controlling trade routes, commanding a disciplined army, and challenging British influence along the Gold Coast. Governor Sir Charles McCarthy was determined to break that power. His plan seemed straightforward. Instead of advancing as one army, the British invasion would move in 4 separate columns, converging deep inside Ashanti territory before delivering a decisive blow. On paper, it looked unstoppable. In reality, it was already falling apart. McCarthy's column, fewer than 500 men, became isolated long before the others could reach him. Then, near the village of Nsamankow, he found the army he had come to defeat. It was waiting for him. A broad stream separates the two armies. Neither side moves. The silence is almost unsettling. McCarthy believed some Ashanti chiefs were ready to abandon their king. Confident the enemy's resolve was already breaking, he ordered his military band to play "God Save the King." The anthem echoed across the water. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then the answer came, not with words, but with the deep, thunderous beat of Ashanti war drums. The battle had begun. For hours, the two armies exchanged relentless musket fire across the stream. Neither side gave way. Smoke drifted across the battlefield. The sound of gunfire merged with drums, shouted commands, and the cries of the wounded. Then the British fire began to slow. McCarthy's men were running out of ammunition. The supplies they desperately needed never reached the front. Accounts from the time even record that one resupply crate contained pasta instead of cartridges. A detail that sounds almost too strange to be true, but one that British military records themselves point to as a real cause of the failure. Whatever the exact cause, the result was undeniable. The British could no longer maintain their fire. That was the moment the Ashanti had been waiting for. They surged across the stream. The British line collapsed. Wounded and unable to escape, Governor McCarthy did not survive the battle. The battle was over. For Britain, it was one of the worst defeats it had suffered on the Gold Coast. For the Ashanti, it was proof that one of the world's most powerful empires could be beaten. The defeat became so symbolic that McCarthy's skull was later preserved by the Ashanti and, according to contemporary accounts, used ceremonially by successive rulers. A lasting reminder of the day imperial confidence met a determined kingdom on its own ground. Britain would return. There would be more wars, but at Nsamankow, the empire learned a lesson it would repeat across Africa. An empire's greatest weakness isn't always the strength of its enemy. Sometimes, it's the certainty of its own victory. Our next story takes us north, where a young European king crossed the sea chasing glory, and instead lost his crown, his army. In the summer of 1578, 24-year-old King Sebastian of Portugal believed he was about to carve his name into history. Young, ambitious, and deeply driven by the ideals of Christian kingship, Sebastian dreamed of leading a crusade into North Africa. He imagined expanding Portuguese influence, defeating his rivals, and winning a victory that would secure his legacy forever. Instead, he was marching toward one of the greatest disasters in Portuguese history.
This land will remember
he landed
our
in
names.
Morocco with thousands of Portuguese troops, joined by foreign allies, expecting a decisive victory over Sultan Abd al-Malik. But the Moroccan ruler had plans of his own. Despite suffering from serious illness, Abd al-Malik united his forces, understood the terrain, and prepared to meet the Portuguese far from the safety of the coast. On August 4, 1578, near the town of Alcácer Quibir, the two armies finally met. The battle was fierce. Dust engulfed the battlefield. Cavalry thundered across the plain. As the fighting intensified, Portuguese formations began to break under relentless pressure. Desperate to escape, soldiers fell back toward a flooded river at their rear, and many who survived the fighting drowned trying to cross it. Then came the moment no one in Europe expected. King Sebastian disappeared into the chaos. When the battle ended, he was gone. His body was never found. For Portugal, that uncertainty was almost worse than a confirmed death. Without a body, rumors took hold that the king hadn't truly fallen, that he would return one day to save his kingdom. That belief would outlive Sebastian by centuries, inspiring impostors and legends that refused to die even as Portugal itself came apart. Because not only had the young king vanished, much of the Portuguese nobility had fallen with him. The defeat plunged Portugal into a succession crisis so severe that just 2 years later, the Portuguese crown passed to King Philip II of Spain. For 60 years, Portugal lost its independence. One battle had changed the destiny of an empire. But if Portugal lost a king, our next story would see an entire imperial army trapped inside a city, waiting for a rescue that never arrived. By 1884, the British Empire wasn't trying to conquer Sudan, it was trying to leave. Years of costly conflict had convinced London that holding the territory simply wasn't worth it. There was only one problem. Thousands of Egyptian soldiers and civilians loyal to the government were still trapped inside Khartoum. To bring them home, Britain turned to one man, General Charles Gordon. Across the empire, Gordon was already a legend. He had earned fame in China, governed Sudan before, and built a reputation as a fearless, deeply religious officer who seemed to thrive in impossible situations. The mission sounded simple: travel to Khartoum, organize the evacuation, leave. Instead, Gordon stayed. Waiting beyond those walls was a man just as determined, Muhammad Ahmad, the Mahdi. To his followers, he wasn't simply a military leader. He was the promised guide, destined to free Sudan from foreign rule. Every week, his army grew larger. Villages joined him. Tribes pledged their loyalty. Soon, Khartoum stood completely surrounded. The siege had begun. Months passed. Food became scarce. Disease spread through the city. Gordon repeatedly asked London for reinforcements. Some politicians wanted to abandon him. Others feared what would happen if one of Britain's most celebrated generals were left to die. Eventually, a relief expedition was approved. But Sudan was enormous. The Nile was unforgiving. Every mile took precious time. Inside Khartoum, time was running out. In the early hours of January 26, 1885, the modest army attacked. After months of siege, the city's defenses finally broke. Modest fighters poured into Khartoum. General Gordon was killed. The exact circumstances remain debated. Some accounts say he died fighting with a sword in hand. Others suggest he was cut down while making his way through the palace. What isn't disputed is that Khartoum had fallen. 2 days later, the British relief expedition finally arrived. They looked toward the city they had come to save. It was too late. The Egyptian flags were gone. Modest banners now flew above Khartoum. The rescue had missed Gordon by less than 48 hours. They arrived on what would have been his 52nd birthday. For Britain, the defeat became a national humiliation. For the modest state, it was proof that even the world's greatest empire could be defeated by determination, belief, and patient strategy. But if Britain had arrived 2 days too late, our next story would see another empire lose an entire army in a single afternoon. By 1879, the British Empire had conquered vast territories across the globe. Its army was disciplined, well-equipped, and feared. When Britain invaded the independent Zulu kingdom, few in London expected a long campaign. Many believed it would be over within weeks. Instead, it would produce one of the greatest military disasters in British history. The invasion began with confidence. British commander Lord Chelmsford divided his forces, believing the main Zulu army was somewhere else. He left more than 1,000 soldiers camped beneath Isandlwana mountain while he marched away in search of the enemy. The decision would prove catastrophic, because the enemy was already there. Nearly 20,000 Zulu warriors, commanded by experienced Indunas, had remained undetected. They weren't a disorganized mob. They were one of Africa's most disciplined military forces. Using the famous Horns of the Buffalo formation, they prepared to surround the British camp from 3 directions. Then, they were discovered. There was no turning back. The entire Zulu army surged forward. The British Martini Henry rifles inflicted terrible losses. Wave after wave fell. But the Zulu kept coming. British soldiers fired as fast as they could. Smoke drifted across the battlefield. Ammunition had to be carried forward under increasing pressure. As the firing line stretched farther apart, gaps began to appear. The Zulu commanders saw them immediately. The horns closed. By sunset, more than 1,300 British and colonial troops lay dead. It was one of the most stunning defeats a modern European army had ever suffered against an indigenous African force. News of the disaster stunned Britain. Newspapers struggled to explain how an army armed largely with traditional weapons had destroyed one of the world's most respected military forces. The answer wasn't technology. It was leadership, preparation, discipline, and a battlefield the Zulu commanders understood better than anyone else. Britain would eventually win the Anglo-Zulu War, but Isandlwana became a permanent reminder that military superiority meant little when strategy failed. One battle remained. One empire still believed Africa would be an easy victory. Instead, it would lose far more than an army. It would lose its illusion of empire. By the late 19th century, Europe believed the conquest of Africa was inevitable. Kingdom after kingdom had fallen. Borders were being redrawn. Flags were rising across the continent. Italy wanted its place among the great colonial powers. There was just one problem. Ethiopia had no intention of becoming anyone's colony. The crisis began years earlier. In 1889, Italy and Ethiopia signed the Treaty of Uchale, but the treaty didn't say the same thing in both languages. The Italian version claimed Ethiopia had accepted becoming an Italian protectorate. The Amharic version did not. When Emperor Menelik II discovered the difference, he rejected Italy's claim outright. Diplomacy had failed. War became inevitable. Italy believed Ethiopia would be divided. Instead, it united. Menelik called upon nobles from across the empire. They answered, not with hundreds, not with thousands, but with one of the largest armies Africa had assembled in the 19th century. Farmers, horsemen, veteran warriors, regional rulers who had once fought each other now marched together. This was no desperate last stand. It was a nation preparing for war. The Italian commanders knew they were outnumbered. Supplies were running low. Morale was slipping. Some wanted to wait. Others feared delay would only make things worse. Before dawn on March 1, 1896, they made their decision. The army would advance through the mountains under cover of darkness, hoping to surprise the Ethiopians. Instead, they became lost. Separated by difficult terrain and poor communication, the Italian brigades drifted apart. Before sunrise, they were fighting alone. Menelik had not been surprised. His army occupied the high ground. One after another, isolated Italian units were overwhelmed before they could support one another. The battle spread across the mountains. Rifle fire echoed through the valleys. Cavalry charged across rocky slopes. Artillery roared. By midday, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Italian army broke. Thousands were killed or captured as survivors fled toward Eritrea. For Italy, it was a national catastrophe. For Ethiopia, it was one of the greatest victories in African history. The victory at Adwa forced Italy to recognize Ethiopia as an independent state. At a time when nearly every corner of Africa was falling under European rule, Ethiopia had done the unthinkable. It had defended its sovereignty on the battlefield. news of the victory spread far beyond Africa. Across the African diaspora and among people living under colonial rule, Adwa became more than a military triumph. It became proof that European expansion was not unstoppable. That lesson would inspire generations who dreamed of independence. History often remembers the empires that drew the maps, but sometimes the people who refused to let those maps be drawn changed history even more. The Ashanti defended their kingdom, Morocco humbled a king, Sudan brought an empire to its knees. The Zulu shocked the world, and at Adwa, Ethiopia did something no European power expected. It won. Not just a battle, but the right to decide its own future. These were 5 battles Europe never expected to lose, and they changed history forever.